Doctors of Reddit. What patient made you go? How the frick are you even alive? I was on home call for ER in a small town. Got a call from the ER nurse one night and she was like, "Em's brought someone in here and they think she might be dead." I was like, well, is she? She was like, "I don't know." This was a seasoned RN, by the way. So I was like, well, guess we're treating this as a code blue kind of situation. So without any further information, I jump into my car and rush over to the hospital. Once I got there, I realized why the triage nurse was so confused. In the trauma bay lay what appeared to be skeletonized remains under a blanket. The person felt warm to touch, so I opened their eye, and a yellow, wrinkled, shrunken eyeball stared at me and then suddenly moved. Potassium of 1. For those familiar with lab values, the backstory was extreme self-neglect, depression combined with caregiver neglect. Weighed in at 67 pounds at a height of about 5 feet 5 inches. We actually resuscitated her, very aggressively, and unbelievably, after about 8 liters of fluid, she started speaking a word or two at a time and recognized her daughter. For those like me who are curious, potassium levels of 3.65.2 is normal. Anything less than 2.5 is life-threatening. Seems like a relatively wide range for normal, but it doesn't take much to get into deadly territory. That's kind of scary. I'm going to go eat a banana. I had to have 4 bags of potassium pumped into my veins once in Resus. Was the most painful thing I can remember. They tied my hands down to stop me pulling the IV tubes out. They also kept trying to get me to drink it. It's gross. I was about to comment the same thing before I saw yours. Holy it. One time I was getting potassium pumped into me and the nurse had left the room. The pain was getting worse and worse by the second and my call button was out of reach. I was crying and on the verge of screaming and ripping my IV out when the nurse came back. It feels like fire is being pumped into your veins. Wow. Why and what did you need it for? What is a common reason people would need it in IV form? Sounds so awful. Patient here. When I was 2 I was being treated for asthma due to wheezing, labored breathing, etc. One night it got exceptionally bad so my mom took me to the ER. They put me face down to do a CT scan. This was 1990, and when they were done, they turned me back over and I was blue, had stopped breathing. CT revealed a volleyball-sized mass in my chest. Emergency surgery revealed what was supposed to be my twin. It kept growing inside my rib cage and finally had nowhere to go in my toddler body, so it cut off my airway. It had fingernails, hair, appendages, everything but major organs. I made a full recovery. I am a healthy 31-year-old now. 0 asthma. Only remnant of that night is a scar that goes from the center of my chest to the center of my back. Update. Definitely didn't expect this to blow up. Damn. Thanks for my first gold. This was a teratoma, so it was never viable human. LOL. Anybody that quoted Dwight Schrute is my hero. What the frick? Yep. It's called fetus in fetu, alternatively known as fetfitusis. During residency, my ICU patient had to have his chest reopened less than an hour after 6-hour open heart CABG surgery. He needed 12 units of blood. His heart massaged then shocked 4 times. Cardiothoracic surgeon in the ICU operating, because no time to go back down to OR. Was an illicit drug abuser and alcoholic. Nurses called him the cockroach. I checked in on him for 4 weeks. He was unresponsive every day. On week 20 we had to consultant to take maggots out of his nose. I was sure he was a goner after that. Week 3 passed. No change. Week 4, day 24 I believe. At 6 a.m. he opens his eyes. I was shocked. He has a permanent tracheostomy now, but somehow he's alive. How the hell did he get maggots in his nose? I'm not that poster, but I'd assume drug abuse. I shadowed an SLP in an ICU one day and we had to do a cognition eval on someone who had overdosed on what his chart called a variety of drugs. I forget exactly how I found this out. I think he was hollered and told us, but he'd done so much cocaine that he didn't really have a soft palate anymore. It had just dissolved away or something. I'm really not acquainted enough with drugs to say for sure. Edit. Remembered it wasn't a cog eval. He had been intubated and we were doing a speech, swallowing screen. Edit 2. People are asking how this means maggots. I can only assume that perhaps when he was asleep or passed out one time a fly either flew in or smelled the dead tissue, and figured its children would love to eat that. You'd have to ask the top commenter, to be sure, though. Yeah, insufflation of caustic drugs is pretty terrible for your nose over time. Even short-term chronic use of something snortable like coke or meth can frick up the soft tissue inside your nostrils pretty badly. I've heard it's fairly common for coke addicts to have holes in the cartilage inside their nose. A couple pictures of me before and after brain surgeries were on the front page around this time last year. The mortality rate for acute subdural hematomas is 50–90%. Of those who live, approximately 20–30% regain any brain functioning. Due to the subdural hematoma, the bleeding in my skull was so severe that I also had cranial herniation. My brain tilted 5 mm, causing my brain stem to compress into my spinal cord. That I not only lived, but woke up and recovered well enough to go back to work, get married, travel the world, return to baseline physically is a straight-up medical miracle. I'm still in touch with the neurosurgeon who was on call at the hospital that day, and he says the same thing. Wow, I went back through your posts and I'm all choked up. That's amazing. I'm sorry you had to endure something so horrible, but so thankful you could overcome it. Congratulations on your recovery and marriage. I hope things will continue to be positive. Lady in her mid-30s was in the clinic for a 1-week follow-up post-foot amputation diabetes. She was admitted straight from the clinic because her blood glucose was 600 mg DL. Normal is 80–120, and the wound was severely infected. We used super concentrated doses of insulin to bring it back to the 200s. She was on strict diet restrictions and we couldn't figure out how it wouldn't drop any lower than 250. Turns out her kids, teens, had been sneaking giant 64-ounce sodas and candy bars into the hospital. Literally 1 week after we chopped her foot off because of uncontrolled diabetes. Not exactly a case of how the frick did you survive that trauma, disease, but how the frick do you even function on your own? I know a guy who keeps telling me that he never takes insulin and drinks 40 ounces of dew a day and his diabetes hasn't caused him any problems yet. Same guy also had his foot amputated a few inches above the ankle a year ago. I don't understand. Does he think the amputation was for frostbite? Termites? Pesky buggers? Know a guy who legit just let his legs fester with open sores for 3 months. Diabetic, alcoholic gambler, who'd already had a kidney transplant for unrelated reasons. Me and several other people saw his legs in daylight, did a double take and legit said you need to see a doctor. You're just fricked up. Yo, developed MRSA, went septic, wound up losing one leg, and nearly both. He's in a wheelchair now, but only because he refused to learn how to use a prosthetic. I wish I was joking. I work in trauma and once had a guy fall off a roof. He said he remembered hitting the bars on the scaffolding on the way down. We originally thought he'd fractured his femur, but nope, just a small hematoma. He was in bed next to a man who had broken his ribs and had a small C-spine fracture when he fell forward picking up his keys. A friend of mine had to get his entire leg amputated because he slipped off the bottom step of a ladder and bent his knee backwards. It apparently pinched some type of main blood vessel as his entire leg eventually got necrosis when they had him in the hospital. They tried to helicopter him to some other hospital, but there were high winds, so they had him sitting there with the necrosis spreading over a stupid 1-foot slip. Another thing to stress about. Awesome? God, that's horrifying, and I would be so pissed for the rest of my life. Pissed at how such a stupid, small thing would completely alter my life and cause me to go through all that horribleness. And also pissed that I wouldn't at least have a good story to tell when people ask what happened to my leg. As a med student on my emergency rotation, I had a guy brought in who had fallen off a 7th or 8th floor balcony and landed on his head, essentially DOA, and we couldn't get a blood pressure when he got to the hospital. As a student, my job was to basically stand to the side and squeeze the bajillion bags of blood that went into this dude. His cervical spine was essentially dust on the initial CT scan we got. I figured he probably wouldn't have made it, but about a month later I'm now on my ICU rotation and I see this guy awake and conscious. Pretty crazy. Any update on his condition? Crazy. When I saw him we were basically seeing how much function he would get back, but he was going to be in the ICU for a long time. From what I can remember he couldn't really move either leg, but he actually had some movement in his arms, hands, so they weren't sure how much he was going to get back by the time he left the hospital. That's insane nonetheless. We had a guy with a major aortic dissection one night. From the bedside ultrasound, he looked like he had already bled out. He had some chest pain, but he was alert and oriented, and we were shocked he was even still alive. He absolutely shouldn't have been with how much blood we saw and the size of the dissection. We called the surgeon in, who was really blunt, and explained to the guy he was probably going to die in surgery. He was a young guy, like late 40s. He was on a business trip, and it was completely unexpected. He kept trying to call his wife, but it was like 2 a.m. and she wasn't answering. He just wanted to talk and tell her goodbye. It was actually pretty devastating to watch. Meanwhile, he's so coherent and alert, as if he isn't actively bleeding out and dying. Most patients we would get in the same situation wouldn't be conscious or would already be dead. They swooped him off to surgery before he could contact his wife, and the dude lived. Remembering that story got me through a lot of tough years in the ER, because I think it just reminded me that hope and good outcomes are still out there. My favorite bit about this story is you called someone in their late 40s a young guy. As feel good as the story is, you've just made a bunch of other random people very happy. When I turned 30, my little brother told me don't worry about it. If your life was a Wikipedia article, you'd still be in the early life section. That actually helped a lot. My dad is 87. He had prostate, liver, bowel, colon and skin cancer. For the skin cancer he had lots of reconstructive surgeries. His whole tibia region and the back of his hands. Every year he has to have at least one skin lesion removed. He had a couple of heart attacks and then sextuple bypass surgery. He also had a big pneumonia, a huge abscess and a small stroke. His doctor wants to see him every 6 months. I think just to be amazed that he's still walking around. If I were a doctor or a scientist frick every 6 months, I'd want to see this guy weekly so I could study him and give other people his immortality. I don't know, man. If immortality comes with those side effects, I might pass. I mean, if you're immortal, it doesn't really matter, does it? You've got tumors. Cut them out. What's it gonna do? Kill ya. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please smash the like button and leave a comment which story you liked the most. Subscribe and hit the bell notification for updates on our latest videos. And don't forget to check the links in the description box for more awesome content.